Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another photography and editing tutorial from Creative Photo Folk. I'm Hayley, and today I'm going to show you how to combine a painted brushstroke with a photo for a new and artistic way to present your images. As someone who thinks a lot about photography and art and how to smash the two together, I was really excited to come up with this idea, which I've never seen done before, although I'm sure that I'm not the first to do it. So, this technique involves painting some brushstrokes, photographing them, and then turning this brushstroke shape into a mask in Photoshop so that our image shows through. For the best effect, you will need to light the brushstrokes in a particular way that creates light and shade so it actually looks like paint in Photoshop and not just a flat bar of colour. To begin, I grabbed some regular acrylic paint and a big thick paintbrush and painted some brushstrokes on printer paper. At first, I tried just a small amount of paint, but found I much preferred the results when I loaded the brush up with heaps of paint and didn't press down so hard, which created a less streaky effect. I tried to make my brushstrokes a bit imperfect with gaps in the paint and a trail of paint at the end. I used a folding light from a hardware store and raised the paper up on some magazines so that the brushstrokes were lit directly from the side to really emphasize the ridges in the paint. But any hard, direct light source should do the trick. Then I just photographed my strokes from directly overhead and loaded these into Photoshop. So now over in Photoshop, I want to show you the base technique that we use, and then we'll look at some different variations that you can play with. So I've chosen this brushstroke to begin with, and I really like this brushstroke because it has lots of light and shade. It's got really chunky areas, which I really like, and then it's got some missing pieces. So that really gives that brushstroke effect, and then these little extra bits at the side. So the image I'm going to work with first of all is this one here. And what we need to do is make a selection of the brushstroke. Now, there are several ways to make selections, and I've experimented with pretty much all of them, but the best way I've found is to go to Select and then Color Range. In here, you'll need to choose an eyedropper, so I will just use this base one to begin with, and then I can just click somewhere on the yellow of the brushstroke to try and get a good selection. So what we want is the brushstroke mainly to be white and then the background mainly to be black. So you can play around with this. It doesn't really need to be too specific. Then I can play with my fuzziness to try and get even more blackness in the bits that we don't want. Maybe we'll go with something about here. And you'll see that there are also dark and light bits in your brushstroke, which is what you want. You really want to get some texture into your mask. So we'll hit OK. That has now made a selection of the color in the brushstroke. And now if we go to the layer we are working with and hit the layer mask button, it applies that selection as a mask to that layer. So if I turn the brushstroke off, now you can see this layer inside the brushstroke. Now to make this a little stronger, what I can do is go to my adjustment layer icon, the half pie, and go to solid color. We'll choose white because that's the color of paper. And just drag that up to the top right corner and hit OK. And then we can drag that underneath. And we can see our painting a little bit better now. Now we've got this bit of the brushstroke we don't want. So while we're here, I'll just mask that away. We'll load the brush tool with B, making sure that black is loaded as your color swatch. And then I will just mask that part away. That is looking pretty good, but there's a few more things we can still do. So I might now add a levels adjustment layer. And I can just really make it even more contrasty to get some more color into this brushstroke. And you can see now how these little dappled bits at the side and how the light and shade of that brushstroke really make it kind of look like a painting, as close as we're ever going to get really as a photograph. So that's not too bad. Now, one other thing I could do if I wanted is to create like a canvas texture to make it look even more like a painting. And to do that, I'm going to create a brand new layer. So just this little one here. And I'm just putting that over my white layer at the moment. And then we'll go to Filter, Filter Gallery. At the moment, it's blurred out because I'm working in a 16-bit file and Filter Gallery only works in 8-bit. So to change that, we go to Image and then Mode, and then we select 8-bit. And now you'll see that the Filter Gallery is available. So it's Filter, Filter Gallery. And that's because we have nothing on this layer yet. So to do that, I'm just going to go to Edit, Fill. I'm going to choose White. And now we'll go to Filter, Filter Gallery. And what we want in here is to go into the Texture, the last one on the list, and we want Texturizer. Now, as you see, I've already applied this canvas before. So what you need to do over in the settings is to choose Canvas. You can play with your scale. At this point, I've got 161, your relief, which is 4. I'll just show you what they do. So that just makes it a little bit more stronger. I might actually make that a little stronger. And scaling just makes it obviously smaller and bigger. I might go for as big as we can. You can invert it if you like. You can play with the direction of the light, which we could actually look at that original image and see what direction the light was coming from, but I think it was coming from the top. And then we can hit OK. And now we've got a canvas texture. So if we zoom in, you'll see a canvas texture. The thing I don't like about this texture though is that it's very uniform. See, that's a copy of that, it's a copy of that. So not the best, but it does give a little bit of texture that makes it look more like a painting. And if you play around with some of those settings, perhaps you can get rid of that effect. So that's kind of the base way to create this technique. And you'll see that it's darker here on the left and lighter on the right. We could, selectively apply curves or something to make that darker. In fact, let's just do that. So I'll pop in a curves adjustment layer, bring down to get the part on the right to look how I want, invert that layer, Control or Command I, load my brush tool with white. Brush tool shortcut is B. And then I can just paint that over any areas that I want to darken up. And then I could just clip that to only that layer. So it's not affecting the background. And I clip by holding Alt or Option down and clicking between the adjustment and the layer. So that's version 1. Now let's pop into a few others. So this is that exact same brush stroke. In fact, that is the exact same image. It's just a different color for some strange reason. Let's have a look at that. So I have used levels to really brighten up the highlights. I think that's why that bright yellow is coming from. And then used another levels to darken up the shadows. So that's what's given it its lovely contrast. So that was the original that we just worked on. This is that new version. That is the only difference. Now, this one here, exact same image, just a different brush stroke to give you an idea of what different ones can look like. This one has a lot more of the actual streaky brush stroke, which I don't entirely love. Like I do kind of like a little bit, but I really like this chunkiness of the paint. So just some things to think about when you are photographing or actually just painting your brush strokes. I don't hate this though. The next one, now this is a little bit of an interesting one. So I really like this side here. Again, I like the chunky paint, but I'm not sure that the really, really streaky stuff is working too much. And you'll also notice that the mask, it's sort of gray. See this line here, how you can see this white and gray. Now, if that happens to you, what I would do is highlight your layer mask. And then what you can do is apply levels to it. Now, we won't use the adjustment filter to do that. We have to use a different way because you can't apply adjustment layers to masks. So what we do is go up to Image, Adjustments, and then we can access levels in here. And this levels will only affect the mask because that's what we have highlighted. So if I now bring up the shadows, you can get rid of that little seam. Then you could play with other sliders to affect how the rest of that brushstroke is looking. So that is a little technique that's very cool to know. Next, again, we've got the same image, but I just wanted to show you this particular example because I don't like this brushstroke. I think it doesn't have enough dimension. It just looks kind of streaky. And that's why I think it's really important to have that texture in the paint. Now, I did do some really different things to this one. Now, this version here was created by selecting the brushstroke a different way. So for this one, I didn't use color range. I used the magic wand tool. So to show you what that would look like, here's the brushstroke. I pressed W to access my magic wand, and I may actually need to click on it. It's the fourth one down. If I click on it, I can select magic wand tool. Then I can click on the brown and try and get a selection. You can play with your tolerance if you don't like how much or how little it has selected. And then we can turn that into a layer mask. Now, to get that layer mask we just created onto this layer, I can hold down Alt or Option and drag it up onto that layer. It just makes a copy of it. And so now you can see you've got that brush stroke, but it just doesn't have any of that dimension. You might like that look better. I don't, but you might. So that's another option for selecting your mask. This is a totally different image. So for this one, I used a brushstroke I painted ages ago, so not one that I specifically lit. So I just wanted to show you the difference. I actually don't really mind this. So the brushstroke for this actually looked like this, and I squashed it to make it shorter. So that's something you could do. I highlighted that layer, pressed Control or Command T, and then I made it a bit more squat like that. So if you're not happy with your shape, you can adjust it. And so then I turned that layer mask into this image here, added the white behind to give it some punch. You can also try black. So instead of having a white background, you can have a black background if that's going to work better for you. But I do like the edges of this one, just to show you an example of what it looks like if you haven't particularly lit your brush strokes. It can still work, especially if you've got some of this dimension around the edges. And then finally, there's just some other examples here. So this one here looked like this when I first added the mask. Then you've got to put your background in to give it some punch. Added some levels just to beef it up. Now you'll see that there is a line here, and I think that's because that's where the image ends. So if you get this problem, you can unclick the link between your image and the layer mask, so this one here, and then you can highlight your image layer and move it independently. You can also do the same with your brush. Move that independently. So all things that you can play with. I'm going to make a copy of this layer with Control or Command J, pop it to the top of the layer stack, and then I will play with my blend mode. So you can see that you can get ones that make it a bit more vibrant. Like overlays, quite nice. And that just helps give a bit more dimension and punch to your initial image if you don't have that. So lots of things to play with. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. I'm so proud to have come up with my own technique, and I'd be interested to learn any improvements or discoveries you make during your own experiments with it. So please pop on by the Creative Photo Folk Facebook group to show us your results. Until next time, happy creating.